Before we get started today, we want to take a moment to remember a dear friend of MCEA and the whole environmental community in Pat Tamman, who passed away earlier this week. All who met her know Pat was one of the kindest and most stalwart defenders of clean water in Minnesota, and she will be dearly missed. Our thoughts are with Bob Tamman and all who were touched by Pat in the many, many ways in which she showed up. Thank you. A little bit about MCEA and what we have planned today. If you're new to MCEA, we are the state's leading environmental nonprofit, and we use law and science to protect Minnesota's environment and the health of its people. This is our 50th anniversary. This webinar is a series of events this year celebrating our 50th. Of course, we couldn't do any of this and certainly wouldn't have made it to 50 without you. Your support fuels our work. Thank you. I'm really excited to introduce today's topic and speakers. As many of you know, MCEA and people all over the state of Minnesota have been working on the PolyMet issue for quite some time. Incredibly, MCEA's first public filing on the PolyMet matter was a full 20 years ago this year. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and this year we've reached a really big moment in the arc of the discussion. That's why I could not be happier to be welcoming two of Minnesota's leading experts to help us sort out where we are on the PolyMet issue and where we can expect to go from here. We plan to leave some time for your questions. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions you may have. We will address as many of them as we can at the conclusion of the presentation. And with that, thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. So Senator McEwen and Kathryn, thank you again. We'll start with a general question for both of you before getting into more details about the PolyMet proposal. And starting with Senator McEwen, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, and especially could you describe what your role and involvement has been in the PolyMet issue over the years?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar today. I'm State Senator Jen McEwen. As JT said, I represent Duluth in the Minnesota State Senate and just finished my second 2-year stint. So I've now been in the Senate, it's hard to believe now, for 4 years, and I'm in the middle now of a 4-year term. My involvement in electoral politics actually in large part stems from my work in community in Duluth around the PolyMet issue and question that was presented to our community over this last decade or so. I at the time was practicing as an attorney in public defense and in disability law, so that wasn't really my wheelhouse, was environmental law necessarily, but I became involved with the group Duluth for Clean Water in Duluth that was at the time really trying to raise awareness in our community about this type of mining. And so just got involved going to meetings, talking with people about this type of mining, learning about it, educating myself, talking with local people who also shared these concerns about what this new type of mining could potentially mean for our community here. And I think that, that really stemmed out of a love for Lake Superior and for our community. I grew up in Duluth and raising my 2 kids here, and my family's been here in Duluth for several generations back. So I have a lot of sense of identity and pride in this place and in these waters, and really wanted to be involved in helping to protect them. So out of that, that was sort of the beginning of my involvement in electoral politics as well, and just getting involved in the issue of raising awareness and those questions that everybody reasonably does have about this type of mining and the wisdom or not of pursuing it in our region.
Thank you, Senator. Kathryn, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, JT. So I think people know I started as a lawyer with MCEA as a staff attorney back in 2010. And this case had already been going on for 4 years at that time. We'd put in our first comment, as JT mentioned, in 2004. So I was, handed this file as I came in the door at MCEA. And so I wrote comments on many of the early drafts of the environmental review and really learned a lot about this proposal, maybe more than I wanted as part of that process. And, as a lawyer, my job in those early days was to build the record. So to make sure that we had set up any legal arguments that we wanted to make early on, that we had experts who could help us put in informed comments and understand what the concerns were. But it was also clear to me at that time that we didn't have enough nonprofit advocates and specifically lawyers working on this issue. It was basically us and one other nonprofit with a single lawyer. So it's really me and one other nonprofit with a single lawyer. And I knew that we would need more lawyers in order to take on this case. And so even before I stepped into the CEO role, I started raising money around this issue so that we could hire more folks. And then once the CEO role came open in 2017, I went for it. And part of that was I really said, look, there's a lot in front of us and we need to grow to meet the challenge. And so I've been trying to make sure that we have the resources for this and all of the other fights at the same time ever since. It does strike me that the two other people in this webinar are people that I have so much admiration for your work. And I met both of you because of the sulfide mining work. And so I've really met a lot of wonderful people along the way as well, but that's my history.
Thanks, Kathryn. Yeah, this is a great group to have here for this conversation. Really appreciate it. Okay, so stepping back a bit, by the way, we have 154 folks in the room. That's amazing. Thanks again for joining. So I'm assuming most folks are reasonably familiar with the PolyMet issue. There probably are some folks in the call who are a bit newer to it. So I was hoping we could take a step back a bit and maybe just share some brief background on what the PolyMet proposal is, what the sulfide mining, copper nickel mining in Minnesota is. What has that meant for us? And I thought we could start here with Kathryn, and then Senator, you could share some thoughts specifically from Duluth.
Sure, I can start with that. So, at its basic level, PolyMet is a sulfide mine proposal, and that is different than iron mining, which we have had in Minnesota for a long time. It has greater risks, and some of those risks include the pollution from the site can go acidic, which is dangerous for people, for plants, for animals. It also leaches out other pollutants at higher levels. So you get a much more significant source of pollution if the site goes acidic. This is referred to as acid mine drainage often. Also, the pollution site problems at a sulfide mining site last for hundreds of years. So we have sites around the country that are, very old mines, and like Montana has some sites where they're just basically assuming they're going to care for this forever. There will never be a resolution or a way to effectively clean up or end the pollution at the site. So you're talking about significant, long-term issues. And of course, taxpayer risks, because that all costs money, that cleanup and maintenance of the site. We also have the risks of dam failure. This is not actually specific to sulfide mining. This could happen at any kind of mining site, but PolyMet is proposing a particular kind of dam, which has similar structures have collapsed around the world, and some always causing catastrophe, sometimes also killing many people if people are nearby. So we've got a lot of potential issues here, and a whole other level of risks from what we have had previously. And our iron mines, by the way, although some of these risks are lower, they're not particularly well managed either in some cases. And so we also have the problem of state agencies have not really wrapped their arms around mining as an industry in order to improve its safety record. And environmental record. And so adding a new riskier type of mining also seems particularly concerning. PolyMet is was only one of multiple proposals. It was the first to get its permit back in 2018. But at this point, it has a joint venture with another company called Tech, which has mineral interests right on the other side of the watershed. So it kind of straddles both Lake Superior and the Boundary Waters watershed. We have the Twin Metals proposal, which is up closer to the Boundary Waters. And now we have the Talon proposal down in the Mississippi River area. And so we've got, sort of threats to really all of our watersheds at this point from sulfide mining. As an organization, MCEA has focused primarily on PolyMet, and we're going to talk mostly about PolyMet today. It does have fundamental problems with its design, like the upstream dam, the threat to the St. Louis River, and Lake Superior, as well as the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Reservation. But as a legal organization, what I want to say is that agencies and courts work on precedent. And so this was the first one to get their permit of these types of mines. And so how the agencies and the courts interpret the applicable environmental laws on this first one is really important. We want them to do it in the most protective manner possible. It's much harder to change these interpretations later. And so that's why, because of our particular role as a legal organization, we have focused on PolyMet's proposal in particular.
Thank you, Kathryn. And Senator, of course, you represent communities that are in the Lake Superior watershed downstream of specifically the PolyMet proposal. So could you share some kind of background thoughts on the PolyMet proposal and from a Duluth, Lake Superior perspective?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind when I listen to, because I think that Kathryn just gave a great overview of sort of PolyMet and sort of where things are at and this type of mining, how it's different than iron mining, which has also not always been managed in the best way or approached the best way by our state regulatory agencies. I think that one of the things that really comes to mind for me is being a Duluthian, just the sense that when this project was proposed, it really came at us and upon us. It was not as if the community was consulted about this type of mining or educated about this type of mining. From the very beginning, it was a sales pitch. It was a sales pitch from the mining industry about just how great and wonderful this type of mining would be for our region. And it was all about their claims of how they could do this. And it would be this panacea of goodness and prosperity if they did. And so those of us that had fact-based questions about those claims that we were hearing were really from the very beginning trying to play catch up with just getting the answers that we wanted to get from both the industry, but also the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be looking out for us, for our communities, for our environment, for our public health, and just being met with like a wall of silence. Or a wall of trying to prevent the information from getting out, from being shared, from having a process. We were told over and over again, just follow the process, follow the process. And then we saw regularly these attempts by industry and certain people within the regulatory environment to circumvent the processes that they were telling us to follow. So, yeah, I just, as a representative of the people of Duluth in the state Senate, and then previously as just a community member that was concerned about this and watching it and seeing if I should get involved and how I could help, it really did feel like our community was being railroaded by industry. That and that also goes to the issue of splitting people along ideological lines, like taking advantage of different people's fears economically that are real fears that are that we've seen, especially in our region around mining, the industry as well, when we've seen mines leave workers high and dry without their pensions or taking off and exploiting our communities one way or the other. So people really desperate for work, people desperate for their kids to stay in the region, to feel like they have a future, and industry coming in and really just trying to ram this down our throats, and without doing it in a responsible way. So yeah, that's sort of what comes to mind that I think is important to sort of center around what a lot of the uproar in Duluth and our region was around the PolyMet proposal.
Thank you, Senator, for those that perspective. So speaking of the process, Kathryn, as you mentioned, PolyMet was issued permits in 2018. It was actually just a few days before the 2018 election, so the end of the Dayton administration, just before the Walz administration. And many different things have happened since then, and there have been multiple permits, multiple legal challenges, and I think it can be hard for folks to track sometimes, like what are those developments. So I'm hoping you can kind of provide an overview of what are kind of the key developments on those permits at this moment.
Yeah. So since 2018, I mean, the big picture is PolyMet has lost almost all of its major permits and cannot move forward. So even though these permits were issued 6 years ago, there's no mining at the site and won't be for the foreseeable future. It cannot move forward. And so let me just highlight some of the concerns that courts have raised, the ways, or agencies in a couple of cases, the ways in which this proposal has not complied with our laws. So first, courts have raised the concern and ruled that the PolyMet proposal does not comply with our laws protecting groundwater or surface water. So the Minnesota Supreme Court has held that the Department of Natural Resources needs to have a contested case hearing, which is like a trial, on whether the strategy to store mine waste is protective of our water. So they've raised that concern. The court has also held that the mine would pollute the groundwater underneath the mine site in violation of Minnesota law. At one point, the state was arguing that because the groundwater is underneath PolyMet's own site, that somehow it's not protected by our laws, but that's not what the law says. Everybody's groundwater is protected. You can't like pollute your own groundwater. That's not a thing. And so that's another ruling that the court has made. So ground and surface water. The court has ruled that the closure plan for PolyMet is not good enough. They really didn't have one. It was really sort of a like, we'll just take care of this site forever and hope that it's not too polluting, and we'll run a wastewater treatment plant forever. And the court has said, no, actually the law says you have to have an end date for your mining, and you have to have a plan to reintegrate that site back into the surrounding natural environment without, constant pollution and a big wastewater treatment plant. The courts have also said that we have not protected the downstream reservation of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. The Minnesota Supreme Court has had this concern. It resulted in some really good language from the court admonishing the agencies for ignoring the concerns of a sovereign nation in Minnesota. But the Army Corps went further and pulled the wetlands permit entirely because of concerns about waters on the reservation. And then finally, and probably most significantly, the court has ruled that a state agency acted illegally when it withheld the EPA's concerns and comments about the water quality impacts of this mine. And so the state actually tried to keep those, and successfully did for a while, keep those concerns out of the public record. And of course, we want our agencies to have transparent processes, accept all the comments, respond to all the comments, and not hide comments, which is what happened here. And so the court has also reversed based on that. The last thing I want to say here is that there are other concerns that no court has addressed yet, because courts only deal with the stuff that they have to. If there are later questions, they will set those aside. So questions that have been set aside include whether the financial assurance is adequate, what company should go on the permit. And then, of course, we have this big looming issue of what does this joint venture with Teck mean as far as the mine we're evaluating, are they actually going to build a bigger one? Those sorts of things. So all of that stuff has never been dealt with and will need to, happen in the future.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Kathryn. Very helpful. Senator, so as these decisions have been unfolding the last couple of years, we were hoping you could kind of share some perspective of how are people feeling about it variety, right? Like, what's been the response in with your constituents? You know, what's been the chatter at the state legislature? Maybe just share some thoughts about these decisions as they've unfolded.
Well, as the decisions have unfolded, I think it's been a huge affirmation for those of us who had brought these concerns initially in the first place, and these questions to elected leaders and to community leaders, state leadership earlier on, and were ignored or were sort of vilified as being somehow environmental extremists or something like that for having these very common sense questions. And so to be able to have these court decisions come down affirming, yes, there's some really big problems with how this was done and with this proposal that are questions that are important questions to ask and get answers to. So that felt affirming to actually have the courts say, you're right about this, and you all were on the right track here when you were raising these concerns. Right now, I think, you know, it feels very much like we're in a sort of détente of we've had these victories in the courts thanks to MCEA and in our environmental and clean water allies throughout the state who've been watching this and doing a really good job holding our agencies to account. But it does seem like we're in a sort of wait and see mode, and it concerns me a little bit because I do think that industry is not. Those people who want to profit off of these resources in our region aren't stopping. They're going to keep trying, they're going to keep going, and they're going to keep looking for elected officials who are going to do their bidding, and they're going to keep on. They're going to keep on. So it is something that I think as we're moving forward will demand some structural changes, or really looking at the way that our laws and policy at the state level direct our agencies and situate them around these decisions. So that's something that I really want to look at going forward, because of course citizens have a lot of things that they're doing. They're living their lives. They can't be a full-time watchdog. The industry advocates who are trying to push this, that's their job, is to do this. They are doing it full time. They have a very large profit motive to do that, and a whole army of people and lobbyists and employees to try to push their agenda and their message forward. And it's just thanks to the people in community, people who are maybe watching this webinar right now, and people who've been involved in Duluth and statewide in protecting our waters, and then really goodwill professionals such as yourselves at MCEA and other groups, that we've been able to just sort of hold the line on this. And that has taken tremendous organizing and tremendous work by so many people just to hold that line and to push back and to get some answers and accountability. What I'd like to see is, can we shift that dynamic a little bit and truly put the onus on industry, on the proposers of these experimental projects, that they would have to actually prove to our people in our state, to the satisfaction of independent regulators, that this would be a good idea before they'd be able to move forward with a project. I think that's just a very common sense switch. And I think that switch should happen. Now is the time for that type of ideological switch to happen, because really a lot of our environmental laws and our framework for approaching like development and economic development, especially in Northeastern Minnesota, where we have a natural resource based economy, or have traditionally, that's changed a lot, is we have laws and policy that does reflect a sort of manifest destiny attitude about development of natural resources, that with an assumption that exploiting the resources is of course the thing that we want to do. We should just figure out how to do that with the minimum amount of environmental damage. And we've rightfully evolved and changed from that type of approach toward our natural environment and our waters. And I think that our laws and our policy should also shift to reflect a more enlightened view about our waters and about our natural environment.
Thanks, Senator. And there will be another opportunity to comment more on our laws in a question coming up here too. So thank you for that. Kathryn, so part of the premise for this webinar has been that this is a big year in the PolyMet discussion, and you mentioned a number of the wins in recent years. So why is this a big year, 2024, in the PolyMet discussion? Like, could you help us understand sort of what you see as next, specifically about PolyMet? Like, what needs to happen going forward here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel this sort of detente that the senator mentioned, and we are at this weird moment. PolyMet's had all of these legal losses, and I think it's obvious to everybody who is paying even a reasonably close attention that this mine can't go forward. Like, it has to undergo some really significant revisions that will probably take years to do in order to meet the requirements of the court decisions. And even then, I don't know, honestly. And then the one party that's not admitting this publicly is PolyMet. And so we have to sort of continue forward with these permit to mine processes. So we had that trial I mentioned that went forward. The judge in that case said, yep, this mine is in fact not legal. It does not meet our standards, and the permit should not be granted. So, but that's just a recommendation to the DNR. DNR can accept or reject that recommendation, and the DNR wants additional briefings, so we're doing that this summer. So we're moving forward with these processes, which feels weird because everybody knows this mine, even if DNR decides to grant this permit to mine, they have all these other problems with their other permits, and it can't go forward. Like, that's not enough. But all that said, there is some indication right now that PolyMet is starting to admit this, at least kind of internally. So there are some documents and emails that have come out as part of this mine permitting process where PolyMet is starting to say, we really do need to reconsider our mine proposal. So I am expecting, and maybe this is a bold prediction, but I am expecting that this process will stall out by the end of the year, and that PolyMet will have to finally be public about the fact that they have to go back to the drawing board. And if that happens, that would be a really big win, because this is a flawed proposal and it's not right for Minnesota.
Thanks, Kathryn. And we're gonna talk now about Minnesota's laws and kind of like the state of them, what you'd like to see moving forward. But Senator, I do want to just give you an opportunity to react to Kathryn's comments just now about the potential of PolyMet going back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great. I would be very pleased to see them acknowledge that. And I think, as I'm thinking ahead, I am already sort of thinking about, okay, well then what's their next, what's going to be next? What's the next big push going to be, and how do we make sure that we're ready for it? So that's just sort of where my mind goes when I think about, like, okay, if PolyMet acknowledges that they'd have to start over again, what do we have to do to make sure that we're going to be able to protect our waters and our people going forward?
Right, and we haven't even mentioned Glencore yet, which is PolyMet's corporate parent and much larger and much more better heeled. And Kathryn mentioned the deposit next door, the Tech deposit, Mesaba, much larger deposit than the NorthMet deposit. So spot on, right? Like we should expect that the companies are retooling, and the next challenge could be even bigger. So
yeah, and I think that's a really important point, JT, that a lot of people that have been involved in these struggles are well aware of. But for those people who are new to this, sometimes, we talk about PolyMet or we talk about Twin Metals, and we see these names of these sort of like local corporations, and they might seem like some little go-getters who really want to do some good business up in northern Minnesota, but they're actually owned, and the force behind them are these billion-dollar multinational, international corporate conglomerate massive companies. So there is so much money behind this, and the PolyMets of the world don't exist without the Glencore, right? I mean, you don't have these little proposals happening of just some local people wanting to do a big project like this. It's the money behind it, and the power behind it is that profit motive of those large corporations coming into a local community. And we see this around the world, right? We're not alone in experiencing this. But when a large corporate power that has an international reach, so much power, so much money, bringing it to bear in a local community, dividing people around lines of economic development versus protection of health and environment, like all of these divisions that happen, stirring up and taking advantage of our politics, sowing division, corruption. And that's what we're experiencing here. So it's not, I do think it is really important for people to understand that this is not just like an issue that we're experiencing that's happening in a vacuum, or that is like small and contained. What is happening here in our region is connected globally to global capitalism, to exploitation of resources for profit around the globe. This is what it looks like and feels like. This is just our piece of that.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And given the landscape you just described, with which I completely agree with, of course, what can you say about, like, how as Minnesotans do we protect ourselves in the face of this? And maybe to narrow that question down a little bit, like what kind of priorities are you pursuing at the legislature? What are you seeing maybe with your colleagues that seems of note? What can you share about how can we better be more ready to address the next challenge that comes down?
Well, I do think that what I'd like to do here as we head into the next session is to really take a more of a fine-tooth comb through our environmental law and policy. And I'm sure you all will be receiving some calls and reach out from me in my office asking for advice on where in our statutes we need to see improvements and changes, and what those should look like specifically. That does, though, immediately, like we can make our environmental laws as strong as we want to, right? We can do that if we actually have the political power to do that. Unfortunately, right now, in the Minnesota State Senate, we do not have the votes, even in the environmental committee, to move forward good clean water protections to pass them into law. Not the type that I'm talking about, like the Prove It First legislation, legislation to protect taxpayers from these types of projects, legislation to hold bad actors accountable, the bad actors law. There's a number of pieces of legislation that we've already introduced trying to get at these issues we've been talking about. And we don't have votes. So we don't have the votes to pass those in committee in the Senate, and we don't have the votes to pass them on the floor of the Senate either. So there still remains work to be done at the electoral level, regardless of party. And then this is not a party thing. As people know, this is not a Democrat, Republican kind of thing. It should be a bipartisan effort to protect our waters. And it has been in the past, it can be again. But we need that grassroots electoral work to get more clean water electeds into office, so that we can actually make those changes that we identify that we want to see in our laws. So we can talk all about different ideas that people have, and I do want to do that. We can identify what those are and we can push for them. But if we don't have the votes, we don't have the votes at the end of the day. If we haven't built up enough political power and strength within our own state to be able to move that legislation forward, then those of us at the legislature who feel very strongly about these things can keep bringing it forward and keep trying to work it, and we will. But if we want to see those things passed into law, we will need the votes.
Okay, thank you, Senator. So, Kathryn, I think what we're hearing is that there are some political realities involved in addressing standards at the state legislature. Setting that aside for the moment, I was hoping you could just kind of react to the state of our standards in general. Like how do you think we're doing on standards in Minnesota? as one of the leading experts on this topic in the state, like what would you be suggesting if we were in earnest trying to like have the standards we claim to have?
Yeah. So going through this process of litigating the PolyMet mine over the last 6 years has exposed a lot of flaws. We like to think we have the best environmental laws in the world. Certainly mining companies like to say that we do, but it's not really true, at least on mining. And we aren't enforcing those laws in the way that we should be. I mean, that's why the courts are throwing these permits out. Courts aren't creating new laws, right? They're enforcing the ones we got. We're not even meeting that standard. The reality is our laws have not been updated on sulfide mining since 1992. There are better and more recent models out there, and some of them are from jurisdictions that may surprise you around the world. We actually have on MCEA's website, we have a list of 10 ideas we have to improve our laws on mining in Minnesota. They include dam safety, financial assurance, closure plans. So I think that's a good place to start. There's a couple things to think about here in terms of strategies. I mean, assuming that this PolyMet current proposal does need to be withdrawn sometime this year. I mean, it does need to be withdrawn, but assuming we all acknowledge that in the next year, I think it does create some opportunity, right? I mean, part of the issue we've been hearing for years is, oh, well, we can't change the rules in the middle of the game. But that has not, by the way, stopped the mining industry from trying to change the rules in the middle of the game. But often that's an argument that's made as to why we can't update our laws right now. Well, if this PolyMet proposal is withdrawn, it gives us a window, right, to say we don't have the pressure of this proposal kind of bearing down on the agencies, and we can step back and say, well, what did we learn and how can we do better? And so I do hope that opens up opportunities at the legislature. I also think it has to create opportunities at the state agency level. So we have the laws that we have in many cases are broad directives, and how agencies want to implement that through rulemaking, they have some discretion. And so the DNR can actually do quite a bit on its own without additional statutory authority to improve our laws. Many of the rules they have, in part of the issue with enforcement is they're very, the writing is squishy. That's a legal term, squishy. Like there's a ton of discretion that the commissioner has in how strongly they want to enforce those laws. So we could tighten those up. We could have better financial assurance laws. Like a lot of this actually doesn't need new legislative authority to do. So I think we have that opportunity. I also really want to double click on the senator's earlier comments about putting the onus on industry. There's also an opportunity for a cultural shift within our state agencies. And this really comes from leadership. This isn't really about laws. This is like about organizational culture within, I think, both the Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, where we, instead of having the agency thinking of the industry as customers and the goal to get to yes, instead, let's think about the goal is to enforce our laws as written and protect our environment as well as serve other needs, right? So these agencies have missions, and serving those missions and not just thinking like, how do we, these laws are a barrier to progress and we just have to get past them, you know? It's very frustrating to me that things like the Huber plywood facility is talked about as an example of why we have barriers to industry, when in fact, that's an example of a facility that tried to bypass all of our environmental laws. And when it turns out that they couldn't, they didn't want to build here anymore. I mean, maybe that's a facility we don't actually want in Minnesota if that's going to be their attitude towards our laws and tribal consultation. And so I would love to see that shift start to happen from governor's office and the commissioners of how do we think of the public as our customers and the environmental laws as the things we have to enforce, rather than being as industry focused.
Thanks, Kathryn. And Senator, you can react to that if you want, although I will note, there have been quite a few questions in the chat that are on this very issue, actually, about the agencies and discretion, and I can kind of formulate that question in a moment here. But would you prefer to react directly now, Senator, or can we go ahead and move right into the Q&A?
But we can move into the Q&A, especially we can touch on that. There's a lot of, I know there's a lot of question about corporate capture, and it is a huge problem. And I would love to also make the connection between some of the different environmental issues that are happening throughout our state, like that the agencies are at the center of. So whether we're talking about the Smith Foundry, or we're talking about the PFAS debacle that has occurred, that is currently occurring in our state. We just passed some protections finally now, but whether it's the drinking water down in Southeast Minnesota, I mean, there have been a number of issues where I think it has been clear to different people around the state that our agencies don't seem to be looking out for us. Like it truly is. And I've talked about this. There's a young woman, Amara Strandy, who we named the PFAS laws after, and she and her family and her medical providers do claim that PFAS caused the cancers that she died from last year. But she testified in support of that PFAS legislation, and I talked with her mom about this, that when our state agencies that are charged with protecting our health, protecting our waters, protecting our environment, fail like this, it is such a deep betrayal of the trust that we have in our community, in our government, in our leaders. And it does cut to that this is happening all around the state. So people, when I know that in Duluth, we had this sense, and we still do, I think many of us have this sense of our agencies are in cahoots with industry. Our agencies are treating industry like customers, and they're treating us like impediments to business and to profits. Our questions are annoying, right? Our regulations are annoying. Our protections are these mandates that are so troublesome for them. And so there is this sense of betrayal of trust, but we should know that we are not alone. Like down in the Twin Cities, the Smith Foundry, if people don't know about it, look into what has happened with the Smith Foundry, the neighborhood around the Smith Foundry, the failures by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency around that issue, a whole community of people up in arms, and the list goes on and on. So there is a real need for us to shift to that culture, as Kathryn was saying, in our agencies, the approach to the work, what the work and the purpose of the agency really is. And I will say just very quickly, as an elected official at the Capitol, you will hear again and again, and there is a shifting happening, but I am keenly aware when I'm in the Environment Committee in the Senate, when I'm in the floor, the talk about business and industry and their needs and the centering of them is just prolific at the Capitol. I mean, it is so business oriented, so concerned about business. At the Capitol, business is job creators and landlords are housing providers. And, it is really a focus on business and much less focus on public health and on environment and on people. So that does have to change.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. So thank you everyone in the room for the questions. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. And by the way, if it looks like I'm reading, it is because I am. I'm through about half of them so far, scanning through them. And I've already seen at least 5 or 6 that are related to this issue of the agencies and their discretion. And just to kind of tee it up a little bit, there's questions about, like, do the staff, are the agencies sufficiently staffed? Do they have sufficient expertise to regulate these industries well? What about political independence, regulatory capture? To what degree are our agency decision-making affected by political pressure? And then on that note, like, what has the role of the governor been in these decisions? And what can the governor do vis-a-vis the agencies and, making better decisions on these permits? So lots of questions about the agencies and the environment in which they operate. What's going on and what could be better is maybe another way to put
it. Where should we start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, a few thoughts. I mean, first of all, I do want to say that the resources question is a really important one. In Minnesota, since the year 2000, And I would say at the federal level, probably even before that, year over year, resources available to environmental agencies have dropped. And if you look at like funding for environmental programs in Minnesota, it actually is fairly consistent, but since 2000, but that is only because we have these constitutional amendments of the lottery amendment and the legacy amendment, and those don't provide general funding for the agencies. Those provide special project funding. So, I mean, those are a good thing, but they're not getting at this problem. So the actual resources for the agency go down and down and down. You know, we hear there's sort of this national conversation that is reaching a bit of a fever pitch right now over like environmental review and permitting, and does it go too slow? And one of the primary reasons, I mean, I believe that that conversation is unfairly maligning our environmental laws, that those environmental laws are important. That's how you engage community, and that we shouldn't and don't need to alter those in order to, for example, build more clean energy projects. What we actually need to do is resource our agencies so that they have the ability to actually review the permits, do the environmental review, and go through the process. I will note, in addition to that, if you look, like the Pollution Control Agency has to come to the legislature every year and report on the speed of permitting processes. And you will see that the vast majority of permitting processes are fast, uncontroversial, and happen on schedule. And those just aren't the projects we hear about, right? The ones we hear about, like PolyMet, are big, hairy, challenging projects that are going to get a lot of interest, a lot of attention, and frankly, a lot of opposition by their nature because of the risks involved. And so we get these sort of outsized anecdotes of some of the larger projects that go slow with good reason. And it's forgotten that the vast majority of projects actually happen fairly easily and quickly and in a routine manner, because we're far less concerned about those projects from an environmental perspective. So that agency resource one, I think, is a really important question. I'll let the senator weigh in.
I don't really have anything to add. Is there something specific that you wanted me to touch on, JT?
Well, one of the things I've heard noted from time to time is, and I think even an outgoing commissioner mentioned this at one point, that like the laws aren't really set up to address the question, like, overall, is this a good idea for Minnesota?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can feel a little bit like we have the agencies and the legislature and the governor all kind of in a triangle, kind of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the other guy's job to figure that out. I wonder if you can speak to that a bit. Like, whose job is this?
I mean, I do think it is our agency's jobs to do this. And I do think it is, I mean, to the issue of discretion, like that there may be too much discretion. And when you are at the Capitol, as I said, you are really in a business-centric echo chamber. So it is not really surprising to me that people who are in that environment down at the Capitol are constantly being lobbied by industry, by people that are mostly focused on industry and industry advance. And that would move things. I mean, it matters that Enbridge was the biggest spender on lobbyists the year of the Line 3 struggle. Like, it matters that the Capitol is swarming with lobbyists who are paid to advocate for industry. That has a real tangible effect. It has an effect on our tax base and whether or not we have enough revenue to be able to actually fund our agencies to do the job that we've asked them to do. It matters in the focus of all of the legislators who are at the Capitol and what we are feeling are the issues that we're hearing about the most that need addressing. It matters in so many ways. So these core issues, you know, that really are not partisan, the money in our system, in our politics that is involved in our government and lobbying, all of that really matters in terms of these questions of, you know, it being a political thing where the governor is saying that's their job, agency saying their job, and other people, you know, they're pointing, they're saying, well, it's not really my job. That those things would get done if we weren't constantly being sort of sidetracked by industry coming in with all of this power and all of this money and influence and asserting that their story, that their agenda is the story and is the agenda.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
thank
then, I mean, Senator, strikes me, given that circumstance, it's all the more important that people reach out to their legislators, because the counterbalance to that, I mean, yes, we should, Citizens United is bad for democracy. Like, there are other policy problems here, but in a very immediate sense, like the counterbalance is public opinion and the support of constituents and public officials hearing from their constituents.
It really does. And especially, I think, at the state level and at the local level, hopefully, and I have seen it really matter to state elected officials if they receive, 20 emails or and a handful of calls that can really put their thinking in the space of I'm being inundated with these calls and these voicemails and these emails about this issue. And they might speak to leadership about that. And so I know that, there's a lot of questions about why we didn't have a prove it first official legislative hearing last year. We actually had to hold an informal hearing, and we did, and it was wonderful. It went really, really well, actually, and we had amazing testimony from a variety of experts, and really did I think it was a good job that people did of sort of presenting the bill initially, but it was informal. It wasn't official. And really that responsibility for it not being heard lies with DFL leadership, full stop. So we are about to have a convention this weekend in Duluth. If people are wanting to see action on clean water and action on environmental protection, I encourage you to write to call to. Currently, the majority leader in the Senate is Erin Murphy. She needs to hear from you. She is certainly hearing from industry. She is certainly hearing from some of the trades who want to see some of these projects happen. So she's hearing from them in a variety of ways, financial and with calls and meetings and emails. So she needs to hear also from people who are concerned about our waters. But the responsibility for that hearing not happening lies with leadership. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we've got time for maybe one more question and then some final words from everybody. But you've kind of transitioned into this. There's some related questions here about the agencies again. And in addition to engaging elected officials, folks in the chat are wondering, should they be attempting to engage agencies directly as well? Is that a good idea? How to do that? And then the related question is, and a couple people have mentioned this, is the idea of the citizens board at the agencies. Mm-hmm. Is this still a viable and good idea? Kathryn, would you like to start with this one?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, obviously the agencies are within the executive branch. The leader is the governor. So the governor has lots of influence and in fact is responsible for the activities of the agencies. And so I think there were some questions about what role does the governor play? Well, the governor plays a big role. And in particular, when it comes to these big political decisions, which have been made political by the amount of public attention, the governor is definitely involved in some way. Governor's involved in PolyMet, absolutely. So what that means, and this is a good thing for democracy, right? We don't actually want our agencies to be, overly insulated from public opinion. The challenge being, of course, as the senator was mentioning, the constant pressure from industry. They're not insulated from that either. And so any opportunity to tell the governor what you think is important. And we have some actions. There's one, we have some action alerts that go to the governor's office on our website. But also like the agencies, and I think this is to their credit a little bit in recent years. The agencies have been trying to hold more public facing meetings, especially in high profile and difficult and problematic cases like PolyMet, like Smith Foundry, and showing up at those really does matter. I mean, the Pollution Control Agency is filled with people, and people care what other people think. I will say, like, many of the staff at PCA went to that job because they care about the environment. Like there is impetus to do the right thing. And I don't think it's helpful to think of it as being some like impersonal decision-making machine. It's not, it's people. And you can talk to those people. And I definitely encourage you to talk to those people because that does actually matter. So we can influence our agencies through the governor and also through public opinion, or excuse me, public comments. By, every opportunity you have, weigh in on permits, public meetings, all that stuff. That doesn't absolutely matter.
Thank you, Kathryn. And Senator, do you want to give us a last word here, and then I will move us into some closing housekeeping matters?
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that there are wonderful people working at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency who are doing their darndest to do right by the people of the state and our environment and our waters. And so that encouragement of that we are paying attention, we're thankful for the good work that they do, and we want to see them do more of that good work that they are doing. A lot of time we do talk about the politicization that comes perhaps from the governor's office and industry sort of reaching in to influence, but just encouraging those people who are doing the good work in the agencies. There is really good work being done.
No. Do you want to weigh in on the citizens board, or should I can do that real quick.
Kathryn, we are actually at about time.
Okay.
So
Another day.
To wrap us up here, maybe if folks have more questions about the citizens board, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to talk about that some more. It is an idea that we support and think it would be good. So thank you both for being here. Thank you all on the line for joining us today. Thanks for all your great questions. Of course, we did not get to all of them, but I think we got to actually a good amount of them. A reminder that 2024 is MCEA's 50th anniversary. And we've got a number of webinars like this and other events planned to celebrate. So you can learn more about those and join our team of True North Defenders on our website. Again, our work is made possible by you and your support. If you're able, please consider making a donation. An enormous thank you to Senator Jen McEwen for being a part of this webinar today, and also for all your amazing work at the state legislature. You can follow Senator McEwen's work directly by subscribing to her Senate newsletter, a link for which we will be putting in the chat here. And if you're interested in more information on the topic of metals for the clean energy transition, which is, of course, a related topic that comes up quite a lot, we highly recommend Kathryn's presentation at the Rosenmeyer Forum in Brainerd, which took place last month. There's a free video playback of that event, which provides an excellent overview of the issue. You can find that link in the chat as well. And finally, if you're in the Duluth area, or if you'd like to be in the Duluth area, you can join Senator McEwen and Kathryn and me and others, colleagues of ours, on July 31 for our annual Duluth get-together. It's in person. It'll be in the evening, Wednesday, July 31st. So keep an eye on your email for more details about that. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And everybody should know just how valuable MCEA is at the legislature, and for clean water focused electeds like myself. I depend on MCEA and your experts so much, and I'm so thankful. If I have a question, you're our go-to people. So just invaluable resource and support. So thanks very much for hosting this and for having me.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.